They had always treated my success like an accident, something that just happened to me instead of something I built with years of sacrifice, sleepless nights, and the kind of work no one in my family ever bothered to understand. So when I bought a $2.3 million building, renovated it with my own money, and turned it into a mix of commercial and residential units, I expected at least a little respect, maybe even pride. Instead, what I got was a kind of entitlement that slowly began to swallow the boundaries I thought were obvious. It started small. A cousin asking if he could just see the place. An aunt dropping by unannounced because she was in the area. A nephew asking if the rooftop was open so he could take a few pictures. I didn't think much of it at first. Families get curious. Families talk. I shrugged it off and assumed it would fade away. But the curiosity didn't fade. It grew like mold in a forgotten corner. The real explosion happened the day I received a call from the building's security guard, who sounded confused and hesitant. He told me there were about 20 people in the lobby claiming they were my guests. I wasn't expecting anyone, so the moment he said my mother's name, my stomach tightened. I drove over, thinking it was some kind of emergency. Instead, I walked into the building and found it decorated like someone had rented the entire place for a celebration. Balloons, bags of food, loud chatter, and a crowd of relatives I hadn't invited. Not only were they there without permission, but they were acting like the place belonged to them. Some were exploring the hallways like tourists, some were setting up tables, and a few of my cousins were already relaxing on the rooftop as if they owned the view. My mother greeted me like I was the guest. She waved casually and said, "Oh good, you're here. We needed a place for the family get-together. Your building is perfect." Perfect. That word echoed in my head like a joke I wasn't laughing at. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. They hadn't asked. They hadn't informed me. They had simply decided, on my behalf, that my property was their community center. I tried to stay calm, but inside, I felt a sharp mix of anger, disbelief, and a familiar exhaustion. Every time I tried setting boundaries, my family acted like I was being dramatic, like success erased my right to say no. My aunt came over with a tray of food, telling me to relax and enjoy. My cousins kept the music going. Even the kids were running around the hallways. No one acknowledged the problem. No one even tried to apologize for showing up uninvited. They treated me like the landlord of their fantasies, a friendly provider who didn't mind if people helped themselves. That was when something inside me snapped, not with rage, but with clarity. They were never going to respect boundaries unless I forced them to see them. So instead of arguing, shouting, or trying to clean up the mess, I stepped aside and pulled out my phone. I called the building management team and told them to activate guest protocols. They knew what that meant. Within minutes, the lobby screen switched, the elevators locked to non-resident access, and the security staff approached my family with polite but firm questions. "Can we see your event permit? Which unit approved your gathering?" Suddenly, the mood shifted. Confusion spread first, then annoyance, and finally panic. My mother looked at me, clearly irritated, asking what was happening. I answered calmly, "This is a commercial property. Events need permission, permits, and approval from the owner. And that owner is me." Some family members thought I was joking. Others whispered like they'd just been caught breaking into a museum. The security team, trained and professional, explained that no one could continue occupying the common spaces without proper authorization. People began gathering their things, muttering, acting like I'd embarrassed them. But they didn't realize they'd embarrassed themselves long before I intervened. My cousin complained loudly that families shouldn't need permission. I looked him straight in the eye and said, "Families should know how to respect what doesn't belong to them." The words cut deeper than I expected, because the room went silent for a moment. You could almost hear the weight of reality settling on them. Slowly, reluctantly, they filed out of the building. Some glared at me like I'd betrayed them. Others avoided eye contact altogether. My mother sighed dramatically, saying I'd changed. Maybe I had. Maybe I'd grown tired of carrying the expectations of people who gave nothing in return, not respect, not appreciation, not understanding. After the last person left, the building felt like itself again. Quiet, clean, professional, mine. I walked through the lobby, noticing the scuff marks on the floor and the lingering traces of their presence. But I also felt something else, control. A boundary restored, a line no longer crossed. That day wasn't about teaching them a lesson for fun. It was about reclaiming what I worked for and refusing to let entitlement swallow it. Family or not, respect isn't optional. It doesn't come from blood, it comes from behavior. And for the first time in a long time, I made them see who the real owner was. And who I had finally stopped being. Someone who let others take advantage just because they shared a last name. My family had always confused my silence with permission. Maybe that was my fault. I let too many things slide because I didn't want conflict, didn't want drama, didn't want to be labeled the arrogant one, just because I had money. But the day they crashed my property for a party without asking, something in me finally woke up. It wasn't just disrespect. It was the final proof that they saw my success as something they were entitled to enjoy, even if it meant stepping all over my boundaries. The day started like any other. I had plans to meet a tenant, check renovations on the second floor, and review the new leasing proposals. But when I turned the corner to my building, the scene that greeted me was something out of a family festival, except I had never agreed to host it. Cars were parked haphazardly along the building, blocking the fire lane. Strangers, well, not strangers but cousins, aunts, in-laws I didn't even speak to, were unloading trays of food, speakers, decorations, and coolers as if my property were some rented event hall. For a moment, I sat in my car, unable to process what I was seeing. But then I recognized my uncle directing people like he was running the show, pointing toward the entrance and waving people inside as if he owned every square inch of the place. It wasn't just a gathering, it was a full-blown party, and no one had bothered to ask the one person they needed permission from. Me. I got out of the car and walked toward the entrance, pretending to stay calm. In my chest, anger simmered like a pot left on high heat. The disrespect was louder than the music echoing through the hallways. My aunt saw me first and acted like she was greeting a guest instead of the actual owner. "Oh good, you made it," she chirped. "We weren't sure what time you'd arrive." Arrive? At my own building. That sentence took whatever patience I had left and crushed it. Inside, people were everywhere, kids running in the hallways, women setting up food on tables in the lobby, men dragging chairs around. Someone even plugged a giant speaker into my outlet without permission. And of course, the rooftop, which I specifically kept restricted, had already been claimed like it was a family park. My cousins were up there laughing, blasting music, and taking selfies with the skyline behind them, my skyline, the view I paid for. I asked who planned this. No one answered at first. They all acted busy, suddenly avoiding eye contact. Eventually, one of my cousins shrugged and said it was a joint decision, because they needed a place for a birthday celebration and, your place is just so perfect and empty. Empty. As if my property was wasted unless they were using it. Someone else chimed in that I shouldn't mind, because family is family. That phrase, said with such casual entitlement, nearly made me laugh. Family is family, meaning they felt free to trespass, disrupt tenants, and use a multi-million-dollar property like a backyard. No, not anymore. Instead of yelling, I watched them for a few minutes. I watched how easily they treated my investment like a public venue. I watched how none of them saw a problem with what they were doing. And in that moment, the anger inside me settled into something colder, determination. I walked to the security office and asked for the building's control system to be put into restricted mode. The guard knew exactly what that meant and didn't question me. Within minutes, the doors requiring keycard access locked, the elevators shut down for non-residents, and the rooftop automatically restricted itself. Notices flashed on the lobby screens, unauthorized event. Access limited. The shift happened instantly. People trying to get to the rooftop found the doors locked. Others stood confused as the elevators refused to move. My uncle marched toward me with irritation written all over his face, asking what was going on. I met his frustration with a calmness that surprised even me. "This is a private building," I said. "Events require approval from the owner." And the owner wasn't informed. My aunt scoffed, insisting they were just celebrating, and accusing me of making a scene. The irony of her words nearly made me laugh. I wasn't the one who turned a commercial property into a party venue. I wasn't the one who inconvenienced tenants. I wasn't the one who crossed boundaries. One of the tenants came downstairs, visibly uncomfortable about the noise and crowding. That was the moment the guilt finally settled on a few faces in my family. They realized it wasn't harmless fun, it was trespassing, disrespect, and disruption. My cousins complained, grumbling under their breath that I'd changed. I looked at them and replied, I grew up. There's a difference. The silence that followed was sharper than any argument. Slowly, the party dismantled. People collected their trays, decorations, and belongings. Some avoided looking at me. Some whispered judgments. A few shot me dirty looks as if I were the villain in a story they had written themselves. My mother tried one last guilt trip, telling me I'd embarrassed the family. I replied that they had embarrassed themselves the moment they assumed ownership over something they didn't earn. When the last person left and the building returned to its usual quiet, I finally exhaled. The air felt different, cleaner, lighter, like a boundary had finally been placed where it should have always been. It wasn't the confrontation I wanted, but it was the one I needed. Because sometimes family doesn't understand respect until you teach them with consequences, not words. And that day, they learned that my success wasn't a community playground. It was mine, built by me, owned by me, and protected by me. And no uninvited party was ever going to change that.